They say blood is thicker than water, but as my family discovered, greed can be thicker than both. This is the story of how a cherished family cabin became the catalyst for an inheritance battle that would permanently alter the fabric of our family. It's a tale that began in 2006, but its ripples continue to affect us today, serving as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest threats to family unity come from within. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when our family gatherings were still marked by warmth rather than tension. But first, you need to understand the legal framework that would eventually become the battleground for this family drama. In our country, inheritance laws are designed with a specific purpose: to protect the rights of children when it comes to their parents' property. These laws stipulate that when a parent passes away, their children must receive their fair share of any property's market value before the surviving parent can make any decisions about selling or transferring ownership. It's a system designed to prevent exactly the kind of manipulation that would unfold in our story. The property at the center of this tale was a picturesque cabin, nestled in a quiet corner of the countryside. It had been jointly owned by 3 sisters: my grandmother, her older sister, who had passed away by this point, leaving her share to her children, and Karen, the youngest of the 3. The cabin wasn't just a piece of property. It was a repository of decades of family memories, a place where 3 generations had gathered for holidays, celebrations, and quiet weekend retreats. Karen, my grandmother's younger sister, was the kind of person who commanded attention the moment she entered a room. As the baby of the family, she had been coddled and praised throughout her life, growing up with the unshakable belief that the world would always bend to her will. She had married a wealthy businessman, and her life was a carefully curated display of success and privilege. Her designer clothes, immaculate appearance, and perfectly modulated voice all spoke of someone who had never faced serious opposition or hardship. The cabin was her particular pride and joy, her weekend sanctuary where she hosted elegant gatherings for her equally privileged friends. My grandmother, in contrast, was Karen's polar opposite. After my grandfather's passing, she had retreated further into herself, overwhelmed by the mundane details of financial management that my grandfather had always handled. Her anxiety about money matters had become so severe that she would break into cold sweats at the mere mention of bank statements or property taxes. My father had stepped in to manage her affairs, a responsibility he took on out of love, but one that would eventually place him at the center of this family conflict. She hadn't even completed the process of transferring my father's inheritance from my grandfather's estate, a vulnerability that Karen, with her shrewd understanding of family dynamics, had noted and would eventually exploit. Adding to my grandmother's vulnerability was her ongoing battle with cancer. While the disease wasn't immediately life-threatening thanks to modern medicine, it had taken its toll both physically and emotionally. She had become more dependent on others, more susceptible to influence, especially from family members she trusted implicitly. Karen was well aware of all these factors, and as events would prove, she had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a cold winter evening in 2006. Karen arrived at my grandmother's house with an overnight bag, something she had never done before. In retrospect, this unprecedented sleepover was the first red flag, a carefully calculated move in what would prove to be an elaborate scheme. She arrived bearing gifts, home-cooked meals, old family photos to reminisce over, and what she presented as simple paperwork that needed to be taken care of. The manipulation was masterful in its subtlety. Over dinner, Karen steered the conversation toward family memories centered around the cabin. She spoke wistfully about their shared childhood, the summers spent swimming in the nearby lake, the winter evenings around the fireplace. She reminded my grandmother of how little use she got out of the property now, how it was really just a financial burden, what with all the maintenance costs and property taxes. Wouldn't it be better, she suggested, to simplify things? The truth about what transpired during that evening emerged a few days later, during what should have been a routine phone call between my father and grandmother. The conversation started normally enough, with the usual exchange of family news and health updates. Then my grandmother mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Karen had visited and they had sorted out the cabin situation. My father's instincts, honed by years of protecting his mother's interests, immediately went on high alert. "What do you mean, sorted out?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Oh, Karen brought some papers for me to sign," my grandmother replied with the innocence of someone who had no idea they'd been manipulated. "We reached an agreement about the cabin. She asked what I thought would be a fair price, and I suggested $3,000. She thought that was very generous." The amount hit my father like a physical blow. The cabin's market value was many times that amount, and Karen knew it. She had deliberately circumvented my father, knowing he would never allow such an undervalued sale. The overnight stay suddenly made perfect sense. It was a calculated move to ensure my grandmother couldn't consult with my father before signing the papers. When my father confronted Karen by phone, her response was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. "This was what she wanted," Karen said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "She set the price herself. I simply respected her wishes. Are you suggesting I took advantage of my own sister?" The way she turned the accusation back on him, making him seem like the unreasonable one, was a tactic she had likely employed successfully throughout her life. What followed was a legal battle that would consume the next several months. My father, usually a calm and measured man, was transformed by a righteous anger I had never seen before. This wasn't just about money. It was about protecting his mother from exploitation, about standing up to years of entitled behavior that had gone unchallenged. Karen, for her part, hired expensive lawyers and launched a PR campaign within the family, painting herself as the victim of my father's unreasonable behavior. The strain on my grandmother was immense. To her, family harmony was paramount, and the sight of her sister and son locked in legal battle was almost unbearable. She begged my father to let it go, to accept the situation for the sake of peace. But my father stood firm, knowing that giving in would not only rob him of his rightful inheritance, but would also validate Karen's manipulative behavior. The court date in early 2007 proved to be a turning point. Karen arrived at the courthouse like a queen approaching her coronation, dressed in an expensive suit, her hair and makeup perfect, radiating the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. She had brought an entourage of supporters, friends and distant family members who had heard only her version of events. But as the judge began to review the documentation, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The judge's questions became increasingly pointed, focusing on the timing of the visit, the obvious disparity between the sale price and market value, and Karen's awareness of the inheritance laws she had so blatantly violated. With each question, Karen's carefully constructed facade began to crack. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. The sale was declared null and void, with the judge specifically citing the deliberate circumvention of inheritance laws and the obvious exploitation of a vulnerable family member. As the verdict was delivered, Karen's transformation was stark. From commanding presence to defeated figure, her head bowed, her supporters shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The victory should have felt triumphant, but any sense of celebration was short-lived. Just 1 week after the court hearing, my grandmother passed away. The last months of her life had been shadowed by this family conflict, her final days marked by anxiety and distress rather than peace. Karen's absence at the funeral spoke volumes about the permanence of the rift she had created. The sister who had spent a lifetime manipulating family bonds had finally pushed too far, breaking something that could never be repaired. The aftermath of these events reshaped our family dynamics permanently. My father, who had once shared holiday dinners and family celebrations with his aunt, would never speak to Karen again. When it came time to sell his inherited share of the cabin, he approached his cousins, the children of the eldest sister, and sold to them at a fair market price. The very thought of allowing Karen to profit from her schemes was unthinkable. As for Karen, the defeat seemed to break something in her as well. The cabin that she had coveted so desperately that she had spent countless weekends at suddenly lost its appeal. The woman who had never been denied anything couldn't bear to spend time at the place that represented her first real defeat. Her weekend visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. The pristine garden she had maintained fell into disarray, a physical manifestation of the family bonds she had destroyed. Years have passed since these events, but their impact continues to reverberate through our family. Holiday gatherings are smaller now. Family photos show obvious gaps where Karen and her branch of the family should be. The cabin still stands, maintained now by my cousins who have honored its history while creating new memories with their own families. But it stands also as a monument to a family divided, a reminder that sometimes the highest price we pay isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the irreparable damage to relationships that once seemed unbreakable. This story serves as a cautionary tale about the true cost of greed and entitlement. Karen's defeat in court may have preserved the legal rights of inheritance, but it came at the cost of destroying decades of family bonds. The legacy of this conflict lives on as a powerful lesson. When greed meets justice, justice may prevail, but the casualties of the battle, trust, love, and family unity, often become permanent casualties of war. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this story is its commonality. In courtrooms and family gatherings across the world, similar dramas play out as inheritance and greed tear families apart. Our story is just one example of how the pursuit of material gain can lead to losses that no amount of money can recover. The true inheritance we leave behind isn't measured in property or possessions, but in the strength or weakness of the family bonds we nurture or destroy. As I write this, I can't help but wonder if Karen ever reflects on what she lost in her pursuit of what she wanted. Does she sit in her expensive home, surrounded by all the trappings of success, and miss the simple joy of family gatherings at the cabin? Does she regret the choices that led to her isolation from the family she once manipulated so effectively? These questions remain unanswered as the silence between our family branches grows longer with each passing year. The cabin still stands today, a silent witness to both the best and worst of family dynamics. Its walls hold memories of laughter and love, but also of greed and betrayal. It serves as a reminder that in family matters, winning at all costs sometimes means losing everything that truly matters. In the end, Karen got exactly what she deserved. Not just a legal defeat, but the bitter realization that some things, once broken, can never be fixed, and some prices are too high to pay even for those accustomed to getting everything they want.